Emma Blake's mornings had become predictably quiet rhythm of coffee, emails, and the soft hum of the city outside her apartment window. She lived on the 7th floor of a small building in Portland, Oregon, where the streets smelled faintly of rain and roasted coffee beans. It was peaceful, yes, but it was also the kind of peace that came after too much noise, after heartbreak, after endings. 2 years had passed since her divorce, yet the silence in her life still felt heavier than it should. She told herself she liked it this way. No arguments, no disappointments, no one to wait for, just her. And yet, some evenings, when the sun sank behind the gray skyline, she felt like her life had turned into a quiet waiting room with no door leading out. She worked as a freelance editor, which meant her days were filled with words that belonged to other people's stories. Confessions, love letters that weren't hers. Sometimes she'd pause in the middle of reading and wonder when she'd stopped having words of her own. The last message her ex-husband had sent her was a polite apology that didn't mean much. She never replied. Instead, she packed up her things, moved to a smaller place, and learned how to live without noise. But loneliness had a way of sneaking into the corners of even the neatest lives. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet and ordinary. It looked like cooking dinner for one, sitting on the couch with a blanket and realizing there was no one to share it with. It sounded like the hum of the refrigerator when everything else was still. Emma had convinced herself that she was fine with it, that being alone was safer than being hurt again. Then, one afternoon in late October, something small but unexpected shifted. She had volunteered at a community book drive at the local library, mostly to fill her weekend with something other than silence. She wore a gray sweater and her favorite worn-out jeans, not expecting to meet anyone, not expecting to feel anything new. The library was warm and smelled faintly of old paper and coffee from the small cafe nearby. Tables were stacked with donated books, some neatly organized, some piled messily as people sorted through them. That's where she first saw him. Daniel Harper stood across the room, sorting a box of novels. He was tall, with kind eyes that seemed to notice details most people miss, the way he straightened crooked stacks of books, the gentle way he spoke to the older volunteers. He wasn't loud or charming in the obvious way. He just seemed steady. The kind of man who had known loss but hadn't let it harden him. Their first interaction was short. She handed him a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird and joked that it was the most donated book that day. He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "That's because people keep buying it," he said. "It's the kind of story that reminds you who you are." She laughed softly and nodded. For a moment, it felt easy to talk, like they already shared a quiet understanding of the world. When their hands brushed as she passed him another stack, she felt a tiny spark, nothing overwhelming, just enough to remind her that she could still feel something. They didn't exchange numbers. They just said a polite goodbye at the end of the afternoon. But when Emma walked home, the city felt different. The air felt lighter, the lights a little warmer. She couldn't explain it, but she kept replaying that smile in her mind. That night, she stood by her window, watching the fog roll through the streets, holding a cup of tea she'd forgotten to drink. She told herself it was nothing, a passing moment. A friendly face, but her heart didn't quite believe it. For the first time in a long time, Emma found herself curious again. Curious about someone, about what he might be like outside the walls of the library. Curious about how it would feel to let someone see her, not the composed version she showed the world, but the real her, with her quiet fears and unfinished hopes. The next morning, she woke up before her alarm, her mind still lingering on that small moment. It felt foolish to be thinking about a stranger, but something about Daniel's presence had left a mark. He seemed like the kind of person who carried calm with him, like he had learned how to live with brokenness and still find beauty in the simple things. The following weekend, Emma went back to the book drive. She told herself she wanted to volunteer again, that she enjoyed helping out. But deep down, she was hoping to see him. When she walked into the library and saw him by the donation table, her chest tightened with a mix of nerves and quiet excitement. He looked up and smiled, that same genuine smile. "Back for round two?" he asked, Guess I couldn't stay away from all the classics, she said, pretending to sound casual. They worked side by side again, sorting through books, trading quiet comments about stories they loved. He made her laugh. Really laugh, the kind that came from the stomach, not the polite kind she used in meetings. It felt strange and new, and yet so natural that she didn't question it. Later that afternoon, as people began to leave, Daniel mentioned he lived nearby, not far from the riverfront. I walk there most evenings, he said, almost shyly. It helps me clear my head. Emma smiled and said she did the same sometimes. They didn't make plans, but something about the exchange felt like a beginning that night. Emma couldn't focus on her editing work. Her mind kept wandering back to him, to his calm voice, his quiet humor, the way he seemed at ease in the world. She hadn't felt this kind of pull in years, and it scared her a little. She didn't want to fall too fast, didn't want to repeat old mistakes. But beneath that fear, there was something even stronger, a fragile kind of hope. She hadn't felt in a long time as she turned off the lights and lay in bed. She thought about how life could change in a single moment, without warning. One day you wake up believing you're fine on your own, that the story is already written. And then someone shows up, someone who doesn't try to fix you, but quietly reminds you that you're still capable of feeling alive. Emma closed her eyes and let that thought stay with her. The city outside hummed softly, the sound of distant cars blending with the wind. For once, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like something was coming, something small, gentle, and real. She didn't know what would happen next. But deep inside, she knew this. The world had just opened a door she didn't know she'd been standing in front of all this time. And even though she was scared, she couldn't help but take a step toward it. The weeks after that autumn afternoon passed quietly, but not without change. Emma Blake found herself looking forward to Saturdays more than she wanted to admit. She began to dress a little nicer, brush her hair with more care, and wear the soft scarf she once loved but had stopped using years ago. Saturdays meant the library, the book drive, and the quiet hope of seeing Daniel Harper again. It happened naturally. Every week, he was there sorting books, talking to volunteers, laughing in that calm, unhurried way that made people feel at ease. Emma tried to tell herself it was just friendship, just shared time over coffee and novels. But the truth sat quietly inside her. She liked him, not in the wild, desperate way she once liked someone long ago, but in a gentle, steady way that made her feel safe. Daniel had a way of making simple moments feel meaningful. When they talked, he listened not just with his ears, but with his whole attention. He remembered things she said, like her love for rainy days and her habit of drinking tea before bed. One morning, he showed up with a paper cup and said, "Earl Grey, no sugar." Emma blinked, surprised. He smiled. "You mentioned it once." That small act touched her deeply. It had been so long since someone noticed the small things about her. Their connection grew in small, careful steps. They spent hours talking about books and life, sitting on benches outside the library while leaves fell around them. Emma learned that Daniel worked as a photographer. He captured landscapes, light, and the quiet details people often missed. He'd lost his wife Claire 4 years earlier in a car accident. When he spoke of her, his voice softened, not with pain, but with respect. "I thought my world ended that day," he said once, looking at the ground. "But after a while, I realized it just changed shape." Emma listened without interrupting. She understood loss too, though in a different way. Her marriage hadn't ended with tragedy, ended with distance, with two people growing into strangers. But she knew what it was like to wake up and not recognize your own life anymore. That shared understanding drew them closer. One rainy afternoon, they stayed at the library long after the event ended. The rain hit the windows in slow rhythms, and most people had gone home. Daniel sat beside her on the floor between 2 tall shelves, a stack of poetry books beside them. He opened one and read aloud a few lines about love and loss. His voice was quiet but full of emotion. When he finished, he looked up and said, "Funny how words can make you feel things you thought you'd buried." Emma nodded. "Maybe some feelings never really leave," she said softly. "They just wait for the right moment to return." They both fell silent after that. It wasn't awkward, it was peaceful. There was a kind of understanding that didn't need words. When they finally stepped outside, the rain had stopped and the air smelled clean. Daniel walked her to her car, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders slightly hunched from the cold. "See you next week?" he asked. Emma smiled. "You will." At home that night, Emma caught herself humming while making tea. The apartment felt a little warmer, like the silence had softened. She thought about Daniel's voice, his kindness, and the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his photography. It wasn't just attraction. It was admiration. He made her want to be gentler with the world again. As the weeks turned into months, their bond deepened. They started meeting outside the library, coffee on Sunday mornings, walks by the river, and quiet dinners at small cafes. It wasn't a love story with grand gestures. It was made of laughter, small confessions, and the comfort of being seen. Emma felt herself changing. The weight she'd carried for years began to lift, replaced by something lighter. One evening, they walked along the waterfront as the city lights reflected off the water. Daniel told her about the first photo he ever took after Claire's passing. It was of sunlight breaking through clouds after a storm. "It felt like a promise," he said. "That pain doesn't erase beauty, just makes you see it differently." Emma looked at him and said, "Maybe that's what healing looks like." He smiled softly. "Maybe that's what love looks like too." Something shifted in that moment. She felt her heart open, slowly, cautiously. There was no rush, no need for big declarations. Just the quiet knowledge that something real was growing between them in late November. The book drive ended, but they kept finding excuses to meet. Sometimes they'd spend hours talking about everything: music, travel, childhood memories. Other times they'd sit in comfortable silence. Daniel had a calming presence. He never tried to fill the quiet or fix her pain. He just let her be. And in his company, she found herself breathing easier, laughing louder. Feeling alive again? One Friday evening, Daniel invited her to his photography exhibit downtown. The small gallery was filled with people admiring his work, images of forests, coastlines, and quiet city corners. But what caught Emma's attention was one photograph near the center. It showed a woman standing in the rain, holding a book close to her chest. Her face hidden, but her posture full of peace. "That's beautiful," she whispered. Daniel stepped beside her. "That was the first photo I took after meeting you," he said quietly. Emma turned to him, surprised. "Me?" He nodded. "You reminded me of something. I thought I'd lost the ability to see beauty again." Her chest tightened. She wanted to speak, to say how much that meant to her, but words failed. Instead, she just smiled, blinking back tears. A few days later, winter arrived early. The first snow fell over Portland, covering the city in white. Daniel invited her to help decorate his apartment for the holidays. They spent the evening laughing, drinking cocoa, and hanging ornaments. It felt simple, pure. When she dropped an ornament, he caught it midair and said, "I've got you." She laughed, but something about the moment stayed with her, the way he said it, the quiet sincerity behind it. When he finally walked her to her car, snowflakes landed on his hair and shoulders. She wanted to tell him she was falling for him, but held the words back. It wasn't time yet. But she knew. Deep down, she knew. Back home, she sat by the window again, watching snow drift past the streetlights. Only this time, the silence wasn't heavy, was full. Her world, once gray and still, had color again. Emma realized something important that night. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks or music. Sometimes it comes gently, like the first snow, soft, quiet, steady. And even if it scared her, she didn't want to turn away. She had spent so long living in the dark, convinced her story was finished. But Daniel had walked into her life and reminded her that there was still more to feel, more to give, and more to dream of. As she turned off the light and climbed into bed, she smiled to herself and whispered, "Maybe this is what coming back to life feels like." December arrived quietly, wrapping Portland in pale light and soft snow. The holidays were close and the city looked beautiful, windows glowing, streets lined with pine trees and ribbons. For Emma Blake, it was the first December in years that didn't feel lonely. Her world had changed in small, steady ways since Daniel Harper came into it. They weren't officially a couple, but everyone who saw them together could tell that something real existed between them. They shared moments that didn't need labels: morning walks, laughter over coffee, movie nights that stretched past midnight. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was slow, patient, and honest. Emma didn't realize how much her life had opened until she invited Daniel to help her decorate her Christmas tree. It was a small invitation, but for her, it meant something deep. For years, she hadn't bothered putting up a tree at all. But this time she wanted the warmth, the light, the sense of home again. Daniel arrived that evening carrying cocoa, cinnamon cookies, and a smile that instantly filled the room. He wore a dark sweater and smelled faintly of cedar and cold air. When he saw the half-decorated tree, he laughed softly. "You started without me. I got impatient," she said, handing him a box of ornaments. They worked side by side, hanging ornaments and untangling lights, teasing each other when the bulbs wouldn't stay in place. The apartment felt alive, filled with the sound of laughter, soft music, and the gentle hum of conversation. For Emma, it was the most peace she'd felt in years. She caught herself watching him sometimes, the way he smiled with his eyes, the quiet way he moved, and how easily he fit into her space. When they finished decorating, they stood back to admire their work. The tree glowed softly, casting golden light across the room. Daniel looked at her and said, "It's perfect." Akima smiled. "Not really, but it's close." There was a moment of silence between them, not empty, but full of everything neither of them said out loud. Later, they sat on the couch, sharing cocoa. Daniel told her stories from his childhood, how his mom used to burn cookies every year, but never stopped baking them anyway. Emma shared how her father used to hang one crooked ornament on purpose just to make her laugh. They talked about the small things that make life beautiful, even when it's messy. Then, without warning, Daniel said, "I got a call from Vancouver today." His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it. Emma's heart sank. "Vancouver?" she repeated quietly. He nodded. "A job offer. A photography project for a travel company. It's something I've been working toward for years. They want me there by January." For a moment, Emma couldn't find words. She forced a smile and said, "That's amazing, Daniel. You must be thrilled." "I am," he said softly, "but I'm also not sure what to do." Emma tried to keep her tone light. "You should go. It's a great opportunity." He looked at her for a long moment, as if searching for something in her expression. "Yeah," he finally said. "Maybe you're right." After he left that night, the apartment felt different. The same lights that had looked warm now felt too bright, too quiet. Emma stood by the window, watching snow fall onto the street. Her chest ached in a way she hadn't felt in years. She realized she had built walls around her heart to keep pain out, but Daniel had found a way through them, gently, without trying. And now, just when she had learned how to feel again, life was asking her to let go. Over the next few days, she tried to act normal. They've still met for coffee, still talked about everything, but there was a quiet heaviness between them now. Every time he mentioned the trip, she smiled and said she was happy for him. Inside, she was breaking. On their last weekend before his departure, Daniel invited her to join him for a drive to the coast. "One last adventure," he said with a soft smile. She agreed. The day was cold, but beautiful. They drove in silence for a while, the radio playing softly. When they reached the ocean, the waves were calm and the sky was gray, stretching endlessly over the horizon. Daniel took pictures while Emma walked along the waterline, her hands in her coat pockets. He joined her after a while. "I used to come here with Claire," he said quietly. "After she died, I couldn't look at this place for a long time. It just reminded me of what I lost. But today it feels different." Emma looked up at him. "Different? How?" "Like I can breathe again." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's what healing looks like." He turned toward her, eyes soft but sad. "You've been part of that healing, Emma, more than you know." Her throat tightened. "I'm glad," she whispered. "You've helped me too." They stood there for a long time, the sound of waves filling the silence between them. It wasn't a romantic movie moment. It was real, raw, quiet, full of things unsaid. On the drive back, neither spoke much. Emma watched the passing lights blur through the car window, trying to memorize the sound of his voice, the shape of his hand resting on the steering wheel. Every part of her wanted to say, "Don't go," but she didn't. She'd learned that love, real love, sometimes meant letting people chase what they were meant, for even if it meant they might leave you behind. That night, back at her apartment, she found one of his gloves on the couch. She picked it up, holding it to her chest, and felt the tears come quietly. Not because she was angry, but because she was grateful for what they had, for the way he'd brought warmth back into her world. In the following days, Daniel started preparing for his move. They texted, exchanged small updates, but neither mentioned what would happen next. The distance was already creeping in, soft but certain. The night before he was supposed to leave, he sent her a message. "Can I stop by?" She stared at her phone for a long moment before typing back. Yes, when he arrived, he didn't knock right away. She opened the door to find him standing there with a small box in his hand. "I wanted to give you something," he said. Inside was a photograph, the one he'd taken months ago, of her standing under the library window, light falling on her face. Emma's eyes welled up. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's how I see you," he said softly. Strong, quiet, alive. For a moment, she wanted to tell him everything, to confess how much she'd come to love him, how she didn't want him to go. But instead, she said, "Thank you." Daniel stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "You made me remember what it's like to belong somewhere," he said. "Even if I go, that doesn't have to end." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Maybe love isn't about staying," she said. "Maybe it's about knowing you've been changed by someone who cared." He smiled faintly, brushed a tear from her cheek, and whispered, "Then we did it right." When he left that night, Emma stood by the door long after he was gone. The world outside was silent, the snow falling gently again. Her heart ached, but it wasn't empty. It was full with gratitude, longing, and a quiet peace that came from knowing she had truly lived, even if only for a season. The night was cold, quiet, and covered in snow when Daniel Harper left Emma Blake's apartment. She stood by the door long after he disappeared down the street, her hand still resting on the knob, as if keeping it open might somehow keep him close. The city outside was peaceful, wrapped in winter stillness, but inside her chest, everything was moving: memories, fears, hope. It had been years since she'd felt this much all at once. The next morning, she woke early. Light poured weakly through the window, and the world outside shimmered white. She moved through her apartment slowly, each step heavy with the knowledge that Daniel was leaving today. He'd said his flight was at noon. She thought about calling, then stopped herself. What could she say? "Don't go." "Stay for me." No, that wasn't fair. He had dreams to follow, and she had promised herself she wouldn't hold him back. Still, the thought of the city without him felt emptier than she wanted to admit. By mid-morning, Emma sat by the window with her mug of tea, watching the snowfall blur the view outside. She remembered the first day she met him at the library, the warm smile, the gentle way he spoke. Back then, she was just trying to survive the quiet. Now, that same quiet felt different. It carried his laughter, his stories, his warmth. He had filled her empty spaces with something living, and now she didn't know how to return to the way things were before. She looked around her apartment, the tree still glowing from the night before, the blanket they'd shared on the couch, his forgotten glove on the table. Each small thing felt like a piece of him left behind. Reminders that love doesn't always leave loudly. Sometimes it lingers softly, like light through an open window. Hours passed, and the silence grew heavier. Finally, she stood up, grabbed her coat, and walked out the door. She didn't have a plan, just a pull, a quiet instinct that told her she needed to see him one more time. The streets were slick with snow, and the air bit at her skin. She took the train toward the airport, her heart pounding the entire ride. When she arrived, the terminal buzzed with travelers' families hugging, couples laughing, people rushing toward gates. Emma felt out of place, clutching her coat close, her breath shaky. She scanned the crowd, hoping and not hoping to find him. Then she saw him standing by the window near the security gate, camera bag on his shoulder, boarding pass in hand. For a moment, she just watched him, frozen in place. He noticed her almost instantly. Surprise crossed his face, followed by that same soft smile she had come to know so well. "You came," he said when she reached him. "I wasn't sure I should," she said, catching her breath. "But I didn't want you to leave without saying goodbye." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "I thought you already did." "Not properly," she said. "Last night I couldn't say what I wanted to. I still can't, not really, but thank you." He tilted his head. "For what?" "For reminding me what it feels like to be alive again." He smiled, and she could see emotion flicker in his eyes. "You did that for me, too." There was a brief silence filled with everything they weren't saying. Around them, the airport moved on announcements over the speakers. Children, laughing, footsteps echoing, but for that moment, the world narrowed down to just them. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out something smaller folded piece of paper. "I was going to mail this to you," he said, handing it to her. She unfolded it. It was a photograph. Her standing at the coast months ago, the ocean stretching behind her, hair blowing in the wind. On the back in his handwriting were 4 words: "You helped me breathe." Tears filled her eyes. "You always knew the right words." He laughed softly. "Only when I have a camera." She wanted to tell him she loved him, but she didn't. It wasn't because she was afraid. She just knew that love didn't need to be said to be real. It was already there, in the quiet understanding between them. In the way he looked at her as if memorizing her face, when the final boarding call echoed through the speakers, he took a small step closer. "I don't know what's waiting for me there," he said, "but I know I'll come back someday." Emma smiled through her tears. "Then I'll be here. Maybe not waiting, but living." He nodded, his gaze gentle. "That's all I could ever want." They didn't hug for long, but the moment stretched, lingering in the space between their heartbeats. When he finally walked toward the gate, he turned once more, lifted his hand in a small wave, and smiled. Then he was gone, swallowed by the moving crowd. Emma stood there, holding the photograph close, feeling both broken and whole at the same time. She walked outside into the cold afternoon, snowflakes falling quietly around her. The city stretched before her vast, alive, full of stories waiting to happen. On the train ride home, she stared out the window, watching the landscape blur past. For the first time, she didn't feel afraid of the future. Love, she realized, wasn't just about holding on it, was about what it leaves behind. Daniel had taught her that she could still love deeply without losing herself. When she reached home, the apartment no longer felt empty. It felt like hers again, but changed, filled with light, memory, and a quiet sense of gratitude. She placed his glove and the photograph on the mantel beside the tree. They didn't make her sad. They made her thankful. That night, she brewed a cup of Earl Grey tea and sat by the window. It's the same spot where everything had begun. The streets below glistened under the streetlights. She thought of Daniel somewhere above the clouds now, chasing his dream, carrying a part of her with him. Emma closed her eyes and smiled. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like something was missing. She felt complete, not because everything was perfect, but because she had finally learned how to let herself feel it all: hope, love, loss, peace, all at once. She whispered to herself, "I've never had so much at one time." The words came softly, like a secret only she needed to hear. The truth of them settled deep inside her, warm and steady. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, Emma felt light, like her heart had learned how to glow again. She didn't know what would come next, but that no longer scared her. She had loved, she had been changed, and she had learned that some people come into your life not to stay, but to remind you how to live. And that kind of love, quiet, real, and honest, never truly leaves.